disruptive.
America that I fought for.
Weird thing to happen. Hello, one and all. Welcome to this edition of Kitz Corner. Hope you're having a fantastic day. Ladies and gentlemen, and all non-binary people, all lives. I don't even know how to do introductions. This, it has been noted. It has been official. I wish I had like the town crier like bell to signify this. But the Emergencies Powers Act that Justin Trudeau reigned against ordinary people when it came to the Freedom Convoy, when it came to the peaceful protests and mandates, has finally been ruled in federal court, ladies and gentlemen. And this is a small step to victory for us, ladies and gentlemen, and all non-binary lives. Ladies and gentlemen, the federal court rules Emergencies Act invocation ruled as not justified. Finally, the federal court here in Canada has done the bare minimum to advocating for the peace, the law-abiding citizens against unruling thugs. It's amazing because the federal court tried to stay away from this. And there was been trial after trial after trial, and then, they ruled something, and then the Trudeau government tried to backpedal towards that. But now, finally, the news is broken out. This is from CTV News. Federal court rules the Emergencies Act invocation. That was the ruling that hasn't been used since the World War, since World War II. They have not used this in any means necessary to go after Canadians, to have authoritarian rule over them. But they did this with the Freedom Convoy, ruled as not justified. So what exactly does that mean? Well, it says the federal government says it plans to appeal, of course they are, says it plans to appeal a ruling by the federal court stating that its use of the Emergencies Act to shut down the so-called Freedom Convoy protests in Ottawa 2 years ago was not justified. Representatives of both the Canadian Constitution Foundation and the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, the two groups who brought the case to federal court, posted about the ruling on X, formerly known as Twitter. The protests gridlocked downtown Ottawa for 3 weeks and blockaded some key Canadian-U.S. border crossings in early 2022 in opposition to COVID-19 vaccine mandates. Now, this is a good point to mention because that was the straw that broke the camel's back. That was the moment where they said the federal government of Canada said enough was enough. Because, yes, they were terrified about the fact they were blocking streets in Ottawa. But what really affected them, what really gave them the punch, was the fact that they shut down the border crossings. And if anyone knows anything about the border crossings here in Canada, especially when it comes to Windsor and Detroit, or, Buffalo and Fort Erie, the reason those are so critical is because there's the most business coming out of it. Transports. There's a lot of money to be made in that border crossing. So when they shut down the borders in result of this protest, in result of going against the mandates, that's what really stunned the establishment. That's what really hurt them the most. And that's why they invoked this unjustified act against Canadians. Because they were losing so much money. They were losing so much business. They were losing so much. The economic stance was jeopardized the minute they had the border crossing. The minute that the border crossings were jeopardized, that's what screwed up the economy. That's what made billionaires and trillionaires, the corporate class here in Canada, freak out. And they told the government, hey, you need to step in. You need to intervene and go against your own citizens. So on February 14, 2022, the federal government invoked the Emergencies Act for the first time in its history, arguing at the time that the national security risks stemming from the protests justified its use. So they say that's national security, but it's not our security that was affected by this, because our security was jeopardized when the RCMP and the Ottawa police cracked the heads of peaceful protesters. They're not concerned about that security. They're not concerned about our security. The national security that they're talking about is their finances. They're worried that their shareholders, their lobbyists, their stockholders, their own investments are going to fall apart because the truckers had so many representation around Canada that was affecting their business transactions. It was affecting world politics. It was affecting the global markets. And that's what scared them the most. That's why they invoked this. The move allowed the federal government to enact wide sweeping but temporary powers to help officials crack down on protesters, access to funds, grant the RCMP jurisdiction to enforce local laws designating critical infrastructure and services, and impose fines and imprisonment on participants who refuse to leave the protest zone. I have concluded that the decision to issue the proclamation does not bear the hallmarks of reasonableness, justification, transparency, and intelligibility, and was not justified in relation to the relevant factual and legal constraints that were required to be taken into consideration, stated Federal Court Justice Richard Mosley. Mosley added that there can only be one reasonable interpretation of the Emergencies Act and CSIS Act, as that he believes the legal constraints on the discretion of the GIC to declare a public order emergency were not satisfied. Mosley also stated that factoring for the definition of a national emergency under the Act, there was no national emergency to justify its use, and that the decision to do so was therefore unreasonable. So, I'm glad that this finally came out, but the fact that we had to wait until 2024, after how many legal proceedings, after how many times we have taken this federal government to trial, and every single outcome, they had no backing, they had no argument, they had no stance. It was proven time and time again. They had nothing to state their case of why they used this act towards the Canadian public. And now they're finally coming forward to say, yes, it was actually unreasonable. We couldn't figure that out the first trial. We couldn't figure out the first time that this came out. It took till 2024 to finally get a federal ruling to say, hey, yeah, they had no argument. They had no case. But of course, even though that the federal court system has finally taken a stance on the right side of history and actually doing something respectfully for the protection of law and safety of Canadians here in this country, the federal government is not happy with this. So True North posted this video saying Chrystia Freeland was asked whether she has any regrets about the government's decision to freeze the bank accounts of convoy supporters, because that was one of the biggest things that showed how authoritarian and how much of a suppressor the federal government of Canada really was. They went after bank accounts of people. They went after their personal finances of the truckers and the people supporting the truckers and froze their accounts, meaning that they could not access food for to pay their bills, to pay groceries, to do anything. Their finances were under the hands of this unruly, tyrannical government that's taken over the financial lives, the stability, and the individuality of citizens. And that was a way of a step too far. And finally, in 2024, finally people have caught up to it. Like, I'm glad this ruling came out. It's better than nothing. But it's a little too late to recognize this, considering the fact that everybody in the Canadian public already knows. But here's what Chrystia Freeland said in response to her unruly decisions in part of the Emergencies Powers Act. Take a listen to this.
Some of your choices on freezing bank accounts and credit cards as being part of the reason where it's unreasonable in terms of the measures taken by the government. You defended those when you announced them at the time. Do you have any regrets on taking that measure in the light of this decision? Would you have done it differently based on what we've seen from the federal?
I love how she went with the classic Clinton outfit design with the hint of a bobblehead I don't know what that is. Is that just to show that you're listening, that you keep moving your head like this? Is that like a something that you were taught in the WEF schools? Like, yeah, keep nodding your head, pretend you listen, pretend you're listening. Yeah, I understand. I understand. Yeah, yeah. I don't know what I don't know what you're saying. I'm saying kumbaya in my head. I'm thinking of all the things I can do with your money, but no, yeah. So let's watch this.
Decision seems to single out some of your choices on freezing bank accounts and credit cards as being part of the reason where it's unreasonable in terms of the measures taken by the government. You defended those when you announced them at the time. Do you have any regrets on taking that measure in the light of this decision? Would you have done it differently based on what...
And I'm sorry if I keep pausing this area, but you notice that when she's holding her hands, she's rubbing her finger against her wrist. I don't know if people could see that right away. Let me just
part of the reason where it's unreasonable in terms of the measures taken by the government. You defended those
she keeps moving her thumb over her wrist. That, my friends, is her tell. That's her tell. Because she knows firsthand that she did something absolutely nefarious to the general public of Canada. She knows that she is a master, evil, cynical piece of garbage legislator. She knows that she did the most worst thing imaginable in this country. And she knows that she's going to get caught by the journalists, because now the journalists are catching up to what the federal courts are saying, and the federal courts are finally keeping up to what investigators and reporters and the general populace have been saying throughout this whole time. So now the spotlight's finally out on her. People are realizing what an evil, notorious thug that she is, and she can't get away with it. So she's scratching her wrist there in a tell-all to realize that, oh, I screwed up. I got to think of something. I got to think of something on my feet. I don't know what I'm going to do. And here's what she says.
You announced them at the time. Do you have any regrets on taking that measure in the light of this decision? Would you have done it differently based on what we've seen from the federal court today?
As I said in my opening remarks, we faced, as a country and as a government, an incredibly serious threat. A threat to the public safety of many Canadians, a threat to our national security, including our national economic security.
So, there's no exact reason, there's no explanation, there's no acknowledgement of why it was a national security threat, because I've seen the live, video feeds of the protests. We have covered it on this channel, the amount of archived footage of the peaceful protesting. There is no acknowledgement of national security. Nobody stormed into the Parliament building. Nobody was threatening any politicians. Nobody was, coming out, and it was the most peaceful, organized event. It looked like a street party. It looked like any, block party that, a cul-de-sac would be holding up in a gated neighborhood. Like, that's the feel. That was kind of the vibe that was going around during the trucker convoy. There was no threat to national security, but she did add on economic threat. And that is why they took action. That's why they took action, because it wasn't a threat to them. It was a threat to their finances. It was a threat to their establishment. It was a threat to their money-making scheme. And if I can't make money off this, if I can't profiteer off of the oppression of ordinary Canadians, and I can't fool them anymore, and I can't sell them crap like a used car salesman, I'm screwed. I'm screwed. So that's why they invoked the Emergencies Powers Act, and that is her defense. That's her only defense, is that it was a threat to her economic stance of being this powerhouse.
We acted to secure and protect Canada and to secure and protect the national interest. It was not an easy time. These were not easy decisions. In making our decisions and choosing to act, we worked very, very hard with all levels of government, and we were very mindful of acting in such a way that
let's just not forget, too, that the trucker convoy, their simple message was to talk to Justin Trudeau. There was a simple diplomatic response to this. There was a simple diplomatic that could have solved all this, that could have stopped the convoy, that could have stopped, the havoc that was raining terror in Ottawa, even though the mainstream media made that up. They tried to hype in it to scare, fearmonger people. There was a simple solution that could have been done. Justin Trudeau could have just came out, talked to the truckers, and come up with some sort of solution. Bingo. That's what a responsible leader would do. That's what a responsible person would do. That'd be something of the people would do. Justin Trudeau, at the time that the trucker convoy came to Ottawa, timely got COVID because it's such a dangerous virus that apparently it comes at, the best time imaginable. He magically got COVID and then had to flee to his own home. He had to get away from work and he had to go to his cottage and work from home. But he couldn't, talk to any of the truckers. He couldn't Zoom call them. He couldn't FaceTime any of the organizers. He couldn't talk to Tamara Lynch. He couldn't talk to anybody because he was timely sick with COVID. But they came out literally days later and announced that we had to put the Emergencies Powers Act enforcing totalitarian ruling against Canadians. And it wasn't just the truckers. They were going after the people supportive of the truckers. They were going anyone who wasn't in favor of the establishment narrative, anyone that wasn't in part and compliant with the establishment, big pharmaceutical mafia lingo, you were met with a target on your back. That's how dangerous this was. This wasn't just a targeted approach. This was single-handedly a blanket overturning against the people. And this is why Tucker Carlson made a phone call to the parliamentarian to say enough was enough. That we need to take action. We as a working class people need to come together and unite against these authoritarian thugs. Because it's not just Justin Trudeau. It's not just Chrystia Freeland. It's the unruling political class that is screwing over the general populace. And enough is enough. So let's hear the rest of the statement.
The safety, the physical safety of all Canadians involved would be preserved. I don't want to minimize the gravity of the actions we took. Neither do I want to minimize the gravity of the threat Canada faced.
Okay, so follow-up question. What the hell does minimize the gravity of this mean? What exactly does this mean? What exactly does that mean? You want to acknowledge that you did a bad thing, but not call it a bad thing? I'm just trying to clue into what context you're saying here. I don't want to minimize the efforts that I did to systematically destroy the foundations of Canadians. And the fact that you are the threat to national security. Because when you don't have access to your finances, when you're taking the police that are supposed to be protecting citizens from criminals, and they become the criminals, cracking the heads of peaceful protesters, that's when you become a national security threat, Chrystia Freeland. You are a threat to Canada. Justin Trudeau is a threat to Canada. The national security threat came from you, not from truckers. It came from you because you unleashed your unruly power to decimate against normal Canadian citizens.
And to your question, I was certain after a lot of deliberation with colleagues and many others that we took the right decision. I was certain at the time. I was certain when I testified before Rouleau, and I remain certain today. Thank you.
I was certain at the time when the bank check cleared, I got my lobby tuitions, and I was able to get a new Porsche afterwards. So I was certain that this was a good decision. But then I had time to think after, jet setting to Davos and taking a cruise around the Caribbean on my 19 yachts. I don't actually know if she has 19 yachts. I'm just emphasizing for comedic effect. But I took the time and then maybe realized that deep down, somewhere deep down, the little bit of soul I have in my body told me that maybe it was kind of a bad idea. But I don't want to exaggerate over this. I just want to keep it minimal. I want to keep it minimal because I'm still a good person, right? I take a bike to work. I told you to cancel Disney Plus. Was that not good enough for you? And these are the people that are trying to, still to this day, are trying to overthrow. Now they're trying to overthrow the ruling that this is unjustified. Because she is kind of somewhat almost what some not certain that at the time at this was happening that maybe it was a kind of good idea. I'm not certain on that, but at the time when I was told to do this by my lobbyists and constituents inside the deep state, I was for certain that it was kind of okay. But don't actually kind of bring it up because it's not a certainty. Wow. Whoever thought this level of incompetency would also be the most evil? Just saying. You never think the two would actually work out. But I mean, look at the Bush administration. Look at George Bush and Dick Cheney, for example. Like, that was an incompetent bunch. That was an incompetent administration. But they did the most nefarious, evil, maniacal, like, unearthly, unhuman shit they have done to the world. But yet they were the most incompetent. They were the most incompetent people. I mean, George W. Bush couldn't find the exit door to the Oval Office. George W. Bush comes up with weird phrasing. George W. Bush is such a moron, but at the same time is so evil. I mean, even Joe Biden at this point. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, they can't even finish the sentence correctly, but they're doing the most evil shit. It's just amazing. The two can kind of go together. And by the way, I just want to show people this. Do you want to see the, national security threat that happened in Canada? Because this is what they claimed was so devastating that they had to take action and freeze everyone's bank account. This is what is known as the most devastating weeks in Canada that has caused the most havoc by the most unruling thugs, by the most radicalized people that did this. They did a conga line. I did have to take the music out for copyright effects. But yeah, here they are doing a conga line in the middle of the street, holding flags. Yeah, that is definitely a threat to security. My God, they're dancing. Don't they realize that they have work to do? Don't they realize they need to make money so they can pay taxes, so that Chrystia Freeland can get away with more scams? This is unruly, folks. They are dancing. They are happy. One of them is holding up a picket sign that says hug. It is just evil, ladies and gentlemen, and that is why we have to freeze all bank accounts. That is why we have to go to digital currency. That is why it is our duty to make sure you're safe from this. Because let me tell you, I've seen people dancing, and sometimes I feel threatened. I feel threatened when somebody offers me a hug and dances around and smiles and offers food and goes to a bouncy castle. It's just terrifying. It's as scary as going to a party. Oh. I just can't believe. Again, I'm glad that the federal court has finally caught up with this. I just can't believe in 2024, finally, after 2 years of this, has finally made this ruling. Has finally caught up to the most basic, common sense stance when it comes to this. So, I'm at least happy for that. I'm at least happy for that. But where this goes from here, what this involves, and I don't know what this means for Tamara Lynch, because they're still trying to find an excuse to cancel and reschedule and push away the trial dates for Tamara Lynch to keep her imprisoned. I think to keep her silent more. I think it's more in the fact that they want to keep her silent and pay her out and don't want her to speak the truth. Don't want her to come out to, bookshops and local businesses around, Canada and speak her truth. They don't want her to announce anything. So they're trying to push the trial date and keep her I think she's under house arrest. I know she's out of prison, out of jail, but I think she's under house arrest. I think they're trying to keep her silent that way. I tried to reschedule, try to postpone the trial dates to actually acknowledge that they locked away an innocent woman just for the simple act of organizing what seems to be a fun festival. I wish I was there. Honest to God, I wish I was there. But I couldn't schedule time to do that. But anyway, good for the federal government. Good for the federal courts to finally go after a bit of the federal government.